This week, first up in the enterprise security news, discussing how Okta is launching offerings for threat detection and remediation. Tenable extends the Lumin platform to all customers. Signal Sciences announces integration with the Pivotal Container Service. And Thoma Bravo, it has a $3.9 billion offer to acquire Sophos. In our second segment, we talk tactics for understanding security vendor products. In the final segment, 3 pre-recorded interviews recorded at Hacker Halted with Kathy Ullman, Joe Gray, and Jenny Radcliffe. So stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Networks are becoming increasingly complex and fragmented, and digital transformation and DevOps are driving an explosion in network connectivity changes. With each new network connection, cyber attackers may gain another opening to breach or traverse the network. At TwoFin, they've pioneered a policy-based approach to network security management using automation and analytics. As a result, you can make network changes in minutes instead of days, reliably and securely. To learn more about TwoFin, the security policy company, go to securityweekly.com/TwoFin and sign up for a free evaluation. By the end of 2020, 99% of exploited vulnerabilities will be publicly disclosed and known to IT system admins. The consequences of that fact means the burglar will already be in your house because you left the front door wide open by failing to patch known vulnerabilities. How can you keep the threat actors out? Through cloud-based automation, Automox enables you to slam the door on unpatched OS and third-party vulnerabilities across your entire Windows, Mac, and Linux infrastructure. Take advantage of a free trial with Automox to not only see the vulnerability status of your infrastructure, but do something about it within minutes. Start automating the fundamentals of cyber hygiene at securityweekly.com/Automox. That's securityweekly.com/Automox. Most cloud threats are your responsibility, not your cloud service providers, and prevention-based security isn't enough on its own. That's why Gartner predicts that 60% of enterprise security budgets will go towards detection and response in 2020. ExtraHop RevealX Cloud delivers cloud-native network detection and response for the hybrid enterprise, the only SaaS-based NDR solution for AWS. Request your 30-day free trial of RevealX Cloud at extrahop.com/trial. That's extrahop.com/trial. Welcome to episode 157 of Enterprise Security Weekly for October 16th, 2019. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined remotely by Mr. Matt Alderman. Matt, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. Good seeing you back. We're back in the saddle.
Good to be here. Excited about the content for this show, as always. A lot of great news stories to talk about, too. I'm excited about that. Quick announcement before we dig into the news. We've got exciting news about our Security Weekly webcast program. We are now partnered with ISC Squared as an official CPE provider. If you attend any of our webcasts, you get 1 CPE credit per webcast. You can check out the upcoming webcast at securityweekly.com/webcast. We've got ones coming up with ServiceNow and Core Security. Always a steady stream of webcasts. You can also go to our new website and click the drop-down menu and select registration, and it will show you our upcoming webcast, as well as selecting on demand will show you all of our previously recorded webcasts. Well, at least for this year, right, Matt? Is that how we set it up?
Correct. The current limitations with GoToWebinar means we can host the on-demands for 364 days after recorded. As soon as we roll out the member site, which we're going to start having conversations about next week when I'm in studio, that will allow us to bring some of the old webcast content back, put it behind the member page, which is the plan going forward. So we'll get some of that older content back, but GoToWebinar limits us 364 days right now.
Gotcha. Enterprise security news. Okta's launching offerings for threat detection and remediation. Interesting.
Can I say hallelujah?
Yeah, right. Well, I think we've said this, right? The identity providers or managers should provide us some level of security because they already have access to the data that largely we pull from and include in our SIMs and other things. Why can't they build it right in? Right? Is that the gist of it?
It's exactly right. We saw this market crop up called UEBA that we all knew was a feature, and it was really a feature for the identity providers to do themselves. Why not do better detection and response of identities from your own products versus having this whole new submarket come into existence, right? And you and I knew that over time the UEBA market would kind of either get consumed into the SIMs, and part of it has, or into the identity providers themselves. And here's Okta doing exactly what we thought should have been done probably a couple of years ago.
Right. It'll be interesting to see how much of a feature set they're able to build in, right? Okta's a pretty big company, so I'm sure their R&D budget's pretty vast.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing this both from the user perspective, right, to look for malicious activity at the user level. They're also created some features in this announcement to help the administrators as well. And I think one of the challenges here with identity is just the administration of all the components under the covers. And so instead of just going after one piece of this kind of it looks like a two-pronged approach is better insight at the user level, but also better capabilities for the administrators, which I think is important because managing thousands and thousands of identities in organizations is tough. So give the administrator some really good tools to identify where malicious stuff is, how to address it quickly, and keep the organization secure.
Well, that kind of ties into the Tenable announcement, extending Lumin to all platform customers, whereas before it was only available to Tenable IO customers. Now, what I thought was interesting, I want to read this and then I have a question, Matt. The cyber exposure score is an objective measure of cyber risk derived through data science-based measurement of vulnerability data together with other third-party data such as threat intelligence and asset criticality. The score is automatically generated through machine learning algorithms, of course, which combine the vulnerability with its likelihood of exploitation and related assets business criticality. My question is, where does it learn, or how does it learn about the asset's business criticality?
It's a great question because I had the same one. So I went digging on Tenable's website today to see where that was. So I'm going to preface this first. One of the big complaints about the threat vulnerability management market has been the degree of customization you can do to asset criticality.
Right.
And when you and I were there, right, asset criticality didn't exist in the platform. So I went to the website, I went under Lumin, I pulled up the data sheet. I don't know where it gets set. It is not clear on the website or in their documentation where asset criticality is set. It appears to be set at the asset group level. So it appears that you can define asset groups based on tags and then apply some criticality to that asset group. But I don't know how granular it is. This is, like I said, this has been one of the big complaints in the TVM space, is that granularity into asset criticality. Right. So I don't know the details, Paul. Anybody who has them, I would love to understand them, because what you're going to start to see is we saw a solution last week down at Hacker Halted. And we'll talk about this in our next segment. But one of their claims is that they have more granularity when it comes to assigning asset criticality. They have 5 factors on the asset that you can set.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's like a whole, you could just list in your head all of the different things that would affect the level of criticality of an asset.
Exactly. So confidentiality, integrity, availability of the data could be 3 factors, right? High, medium, and low. We see that in the NIST. It could be public facing or non-public facing. So there's a lot of different criteria. What I don't know is how Tenable is storing that data and then using it in their algorithms, because that is a new component. The threat piece and the vulnerability piece have been there for a long time. The asset stuff is new, so I don't know how deep it is, and I don't know how much it influences the risk score, because that's going to be a really important component.
Yeah, and that's where vendors, such as Kenna and RiskSense and others come into play, and where a lot of enterprises build their own solutions, is largely to add in, 2 things. One is that asset criticality, right? The second thing is, who do I assign the ticket to when I find something wrong, right?
Right.
And then you build on top of that. Yeah, and build on top of that. Okay, they said they've fixed it. Now I rescan and completing that end of the cycle is typically where people will either acquire more vendor product and or build stuff on their own to accomplish that full vulnerability management program, which now, I mean, you could apply DevOps certainly to that process, right? And the feedback loop is extremely important, because if I start grouping assets, like if I think of our own assets, right, and I start grouping assets, I may have a different criticality for the same app, right? The app in development that doesn't use production data has a different criticality of staging and production, which does have production data. However, if I find issues in either one of those environments, it's the same group that needs to get the ticket and fix it, right? Or maybe there's a couple different groups depending on which part of it. Likely it's development, right? If it's containerized and CI/CD pipeline, developers are going to control the patches that are applied to when you build the container, updating the software, right? So there's a lot of complexity built in there, which is why we see, NopSec and all the other Kenna and all these other vendors coming into play to help provide that.
Yeah, there's a couple other things that those other solutions do, and this gets interesting at the bottom of the article, the Tenable article, is not the other solutions have a lot of integrations, not only into other data sources, right, across different vulnerability scanners, but also has a lot of integration into the ticketing systems to allow those workflows to effectively happen, which is why they've been able to continue to grow. But at the bottom of this article, there's two things I want to point out. Number one, it says it'll be available to SC by the end of 2019. It's still 2 years late.
Right.
Anybody who's counting, who saw the original Lumin announcement before they went IPO, they're 2 years late. Okay. But the second thing it says down here is that going forward, the connector will be extended to ingest additional third-party data sources into the Tenable platform, such as third-party vulnerability data. That is a concept we had years ago. It looks like they are going to continue to move forward with that capability, which would put it much more squarely in the sights of a Kenna, NopSec, RiskSense, et cetera, because that's where their real value is today, is because they can ingest data from any vuln platform.
You know, a new sponsor called PlexTrack is doing that from a slightly different angle today, taking the data from penetration testers and scans and allowing you to put that into a report that gets, operationalized by the client. But much of what they built that I really, really like is they can take a vulnerability in any shape, form, or fashion and put it into the same reporting template and infrastructure and process, right? So let's say your vuln scanner is going to find stuff, right? Your app scanner is going to find different stuff. Your configuration management is going to find different stuff. I may just walk in and test something and go, that's a finding. Okay, where do I put it, right? I think that the Tenables and the big three vuln scanning companies are starting to expand, but what they find isn't necessarily everything that you need to worry about, right? A vulnerability or exposure could come from anywhere. Right, anyone can report it. Could come from any type of system, different types of scans, and we have cloud management solutions. The whole thing. It's a much more broad spectrum than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, and we touched on this a little bit on Application Security Weekly on Monday, is because of this concept of a CVE versus a CWE versus a CCE, right? They are all vulnerabilities at the end of the day, but we can't think of
CCE.
Yeah. Common configuration enumeration, which was a thing back in the day, and then MITRE dropped it.
Interesting.
But
brought it back.
It was, no, not really. The reason I brought it up is there are lots of types of vulnerabilities, not just what is known as a CVE, a common vulnerability enumeration in the National Vulnerability Database. A misconfiguration, formerly known as a CCE, is a vulnerability. A CWE, a common weakness enumeration, which a lot of the web app scanners look for around the OWASP top 10, et cetera, is a vulnerability, right? And so when we think about vulnerabilities, we have to think a little more broadly and not just about the CVE, to your point, Paul. And vendors that can correlate, standardize, normalize that data into a common format to say whether it comes as a CVE, a misconfiguration, a weakness, et cetera, they are all vulnerabilities that need to be scored and addressed in some form or fashion.
Correct.
And if you can do it in a consistent way, then the ability to integrate that data and provide more of that kind of single pane of glass, at least from a vulnerability perspective, will be important.
Yep, agreed. And I find it interesting that Tenable is going to take data from third parties, I think they're squarely positioning themselves. I don't know that Rapid7 or Qualys does that.
They don't. This was a question that came up. There's a nice little story here. It's kind of fun. In 2015, first sales kickoff at Tenable, we sat down with Paul Proctor from Gartner. And I had known Paul from my days in the GRC space. And I kind of sat down with him with the executive team at Tenable at the time. And we were talking about strategy, and we were talking about the future of where we could see Tenable going. I'm laying out this vision. And Paul Proctor turns to Ron Gula and looks at him and he says, would you be willing to take data from other platforms? And Ron kind of sat there and thought about it for a minute, and he didn't know how to answer the question. He looked at me and I said, absolutely.
Right.
If you want to be in the risk game, then you have to be willing to take data from other sources to provide that intelligence on all the data to be in the risk platform space. And it looks like they're going to continue to execute on that vision. Hallelujah, because you're right. We haven't seen that from Rapid7 and we haven't seen it from Qualys. And that's why the TVM vendors have been so successful, is because they can correlate across all those different solutions.
Right. In the acquisition news this week, of course, Thoma Bravo makes a $3.9 billion offer, which I believe has been accepted. The article makes it sound like they made the offer, but when I read the article, this deal is almost done, right?
Yeah, it has to be approved. Now, Sophos is a public company on the London Stock Exchange. They are part of the Security Weekly 25 Index, which we covered on Monday, and Business Security Weekly. I didn't cover this there because I knew we would cover it here, and I didn't kind of want to do it twice.
Sure.
But they're a public company, so it has to go to approval by the board, right? So the offer has to be presented to the shareholders, has to be voted upon. The board has recommended accepting the offer. And if you look at the stock, how would you not? Like I said, I've been tracking this company since we created the Security Weekly Index 2025 Index earlier this year. And the highest they ever were from a valuation was about $2.5 billion market cap. They were sitting under $2 billion when this announcement was made. They're sitting at $2.77 billion market cap. This is a 3.9. It's actually 3.82, I think, is the latest number I saw. $3.82 billion. There's still a 30 to 40% move in market cap on the stock, which has not been realized yet, which is interesting to me. So I don't know, as a shareholder, how can you say no? There's still premium based on the offer.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine this deal would go through. Of course, there's some interesting things in a political climate going on with Brexit. I don't pretend to know all of the details. I know one of the things that could be tied to that, on a personal note, is in the U.S. is imposing a 25% tariff on all Scotch that is imported, which that greatly affects me, Matt.
I know. Well, it affects both of us because we both like our Scotch.
Right.
Yeah, I think the political side of this is Brexit's coming at the end of October. There has to be a decision on Brexit. And the question is, does the EU accept a new set of terms from the United Kingdom, or is it a no-deal Brexit, which has a lot of uncertainty to it?
Yep.
So that may be why there's still some space in between the offer price and the current market cap, because nobody knows what's going to happen with interest rate or with currency rates.
Yeah.
Tariffs, etc. I just found it interesting that you still see premium over the purchase price. Normally by now, the stock is trading at the buy price.
Interesting announcement from Radware. Their WAF that enables DevOps organizations to develop and deliver deliver applications securely without compromising agility. They're calling it Radware's Kubernetes WAF. They say it's the only solution offering an auto policy generation and optimization engine for application security in Kubernetes environments, enabling protection against known threats and zero-day attacks. They have to throw those buzzwords in there, right? It protects data leakage across applications, APIs. It provides a single termination point of TLS traffic at the host level, thus eliminating the need to manage multiple certificates, which is interesting as well. We try to dig into what Radware is doing, and it's a very large body of water to navigate. This sounds pretty cool. I don't know about some of their claims, though, Matt.
The thing I'm trying to figure out here is, I think what this is, but I'm not positive because it's hard to tell. This is if you're running your own Kubernetes cluster and you can install this WAF thing around it. What I'm curious about is how relevant is this technology if you're running ECS or EKS in Amazon?
Yeah.
Right? My sniff test for an announcement like this is, does it work in Fargate?
Yep.
If it works in Fargate, then it has value. My guess is this doesn't run in Fargate. My guess is this runs on the Kubernetes cluster that you have access and control of. And so the question for me is, how valuable is a Kubernetes WAF when you're running Kubernetes as a orchestration as a service platform in the cloud, for example? It seems to me that this is another application of a technology to a new emerging technology area and may not be as all great as we might think when we read it.
Interesting they chose the term WAF, right? I mean, that has connotations that could be negative in the security community given the legacy history behind it. Of course, newer application security vendors are trying to differentiate themselves but still be in that WAF bucket. Like Signal Sciences, we've had a lot of conversations with them on the air about being in the WAF bucket, and they've done a great job in messaging and differentiating themselves from older WAF technologies that gave us problems and how they implement their solutions today, which is great. I mean, we had a trial of Signal Sciences. It's awesome. Love the product. Great visibility into your, in our case, containerized applications.
Yeah, so we have the article that is the corollary to this, which is the Signal Sciences announcement with Pivotal Container Services. So you've already got WAFs out there. So again, we're looking at this Radware Kubernetes WAF going, is there anything there? Then you have Signal Sciences come along and make an announcement for integration with Pivotal Container Services. Now, this is an interesting announcement because we know the value of the Signal Sciences WAF. We've tested it in our own application. They're a sponsor. We've done a lot of work. What they've decided to do is partner with a container service, which happens to be running Kubernetes under the covers, by the way, but doing it at the right layer to me, which is more at the container services layer, not at the orchestration layer per se.
Right.
And that's where I said is depending on where this thing runs on the Radware side, how valuable is it? Where I can see some great opportunities with the Signal Sciences announcement for anybody running PCS, the ability to add in both their RASP and WAF functionality into that container environment, which is going to protect aspects of the orchestrator and the container. And that's where the real value is in these solutions, in my opinion.
So rather than go to Fargate, I would go to Pivotal?
You could, yeah. So and if you were going to run your own environment and you didn't want to go to Amazon and run it there, you would go to something like Pivotal Container Services, which would be kind of similar to an ECS, EKS.
Sure.
It's kind of in between ECS, EKS, and a Fargate, right? It's not. It's a little more than just the orchestration as a service, but not as hands off. I don't think is a Fargate, for example. So it kind of sits in that layer. But it's for those companies that are VMware customers, because VMware and Pivotal are heavily linked. And this is the ability to run these types of services from maybe your own data center, right? If you're not ready to go 100% cloud.
Oh, so Pivotal runs locally in your environment?
It can run locally, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I think it runs on VMware.
Gotcha. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I wasn't familiar with Pivotal. Interesting decisions. We've talked about where do you host your containers. And I maintain the beauty of it is once you get your app in a container, you've got options, which is great because I don't want to say they're 100% universal, but even with a little tweaking, a container can run, in a lot of different environments.
Exactly. And see, that's where containerization really changes the paradigm of security. When everything's in a container and can run anywhere, it's not about the underlying infrastructure. It's about the application running in the container. That's why solutions that can really run at the container layer have longevity in the AppSec space because they're not dependent on the underlying infrastructure, right? And that's why I'm not sure that the Radware WAF provides a lot of value because I may not own the Kubernetes cluster.
The challenge that many still bring to me today is containers with Microsoft Windows. And specifically, how do you containerize a Windows application or a Windows operating system or run it on Windows, right? Run your containers on top of Windows. There are still significant challenges to doing that at enterprise scale. It seems to me like you can get it running in the lab with, roll up your sleeves and dig in a little, but it's not ready for prime time. I don't know. Microsoft is making advances that we still never think. I mean, they just came out with an Android-based tablet or phone or whatever. I haven't researched it, but they're now producing an Android device. So I would imagine they would want to move to the container space. Otherwise, they could lose market share, right? If I can go build my app on a Linux-based container platform, and why would, and the benefits there far outweigh maybe what you have in Windows. But of course, people are entrenched in Windows, and it's not a bad decision. I'm not saying that, right?
But Windows has made some advancements in this space. There is now a Linux kernel running in Windows. .NET Core allows you to run containers with the .NET instrumentation set, for example, right? Even though it's Linux-based. So Microsoft's actually made some moves to make it easier to containerize Windows components. And there are also Windows-based container instances available in Azure. So they have done some really good things to make it easier to move Windows-based technologies, leveraging some of the Linux core components of containers, but there are Windows container capabilities as well.
So I was speaking with someone at Hacker Halted, and I said to him, I said that exact thing, man. I'm like, the Windows now has a Linux kernel, so we should be able to run containers. He's like, that sounds great in a lab. He's like, when you put, and I get this, right, because I've done this, you put a production application inside of a container, the app running is the easier part, but resources are the challenge, right? Because you've got a Windows kernel, and then you've got a Linux kernel, and then for your containers, you have to define networking and storage and domain names and all that stuff. And that's the stuff that gets really difficult on Windows, right? Because how do you share? Now you got two kernels running and you have to share resources like files and file shares and networking. And that's where it gets gnarly.
We need a good Windows expert to help us figure that one out.
Right? Because it sounds to me like it's still in its earlier stages. In any case. Interesting discussion. We should get some people on from Microsoft to talk specifically about containers and the container strategy. Container Flow AI launches Threat AI, an open, scalable AI ops platform. Now, I don't want to pick on Counterflow AI. I think that's what I said, right? Counterflow AI.
You said container flow, but that's all right.
Okay, because we were just talking about containers. Counterflow AI launches Threat AI, an open, scalable AI ops platform. Now, there's two things here that I wasn't really able to dig into. I think that vendors coming up with their own kind of buzzwords and terminology can backfire somewhat. Sure, a large company like Tenable can deem cyber exposure, and they're putting it all behind it, and they're still running with it, and it's gained more traction than I actually thought it was going to, right? But when you're a smaller player and you start coming up with your own terminology like AI ops, that can be dangerous because people aren't going to know what that is, right? The other thing is when you make announcements, I couldn't find any differentiators in here, Matt. Like they say based on, Randy Caldejon, the chief executive and co-founder, says based on an AI ops powered platform, Threat AI enables machine learning and artificial intelligence to go to work for security analysts and provide them instant access to the hard facts sooner. We all know that this is the goal. We all know the problems that it solves, and we all know that the benefits that it can have when you have a system that can do this. The problem is there's dozens and dozens of vendors that are claiming the exact same thing.
Yeah, and a couple of them are sponsors. Look at ExtraHop that's doing this at the network, passively collecting this data, visualizing, making it available. You have Corelight, which is the commercial version of Bro. You have Bro on the open source side. Where's the differentiation? What I see here is an open source sensor, recorder, and a visualizer. Okay.
Right.
Bro,
we have a lot of those.
I think already does a bunch of that as well. You do at least the sensor and the recorder piece.
Yes, correct. The analytics piece, people use Elastic and Kibana and Elk Stack, basically.
Well, I think their visualizer is based on Elasticsearch and Kibana, so it's basically the same thing.
Yeah. Well,
maybe a little more bundled, but
and they put a commercial team behind, developing it. When you're open source, it's whatever people are contributing, right?
Right. I wonder if this is a failed commercial attempt, and therefore they just decided to open source everything, see if they could gain some traction, and then build a commercial version.
Could be. Not sure. I was just hoping for more differentiators, because I had not heard of Counterflow AI before, and they could have the world's greatest solution, right? But in today's market, you got to tell me why it deserves attention, right? Because I think everyone's starving for the attention of security professionals that have problems that can be solved.
Right. Talking about not differentiating yourself, let's talk Acronis for a second, right?
Acronis.
I don't know.
I was like, I know this name, and they're a backup provider.
Right.
Right? That's their bread and butter, is they provide enterprise level backups, right?
Right. But you got to read this opening statement, right? Acronis, a global leader in cyber protection, announced several new cyber protection solutions: Acronis Cyber Protect, Acronis Cyber Platform, and Acronis Cyber Infrastructure. Boy, they need somebody to help them name products, because that is brutal.
They didn't come up with their own names, though, so there is a balance in between them, Matt. You're right.
Yeah, it's a cyber mouthful, to say the least.
It is.
And then you dig down in here and you're like, okay, what does all this mean? All right, so Cyber Protect is integrating 7 key cyber protection capabilities in one easy-to-use solution. It's their backup recovery, AI-based protection against malware, data authenticity certification and validation, vulnerability assessments, patch management, and remote monitoring and management. That's a lot. And then the platform allows you to distribute it to developers and ISVs. And then I haven't figured, this cyber infrastructure delivers cost-effective, easy-to-use, hyper-converged infrastructure optimized for cyber protection deployment. Is that like a infrastructure as a service offering? I still can't tell from the description what the heck that means.
I really think that they're trying to go after the SMB market, whether direct or through an MSP or MSSP, or however you want to term it, in preying upon the ransomware aspect of it, right? Is smaller business SMBs don't have the resources to do all of these things and have separate teams for all of these different areas that you mentioned, Matt, and from the article. So we want to go to one place and really messaging on the ransomware part of it. I don't know, they mentioned ransomware in here, but when I read this, I was like, these are, if you were doing these things and had one platform to do it really well for you, you would be a lot more resilient to ransomware, especially in the backup and disaster recovery, right?
Right. I think what they're doing is trying to position themselves to all the cities and municipalities that have been under ransomware attacks to provide a set of functionality to make them a little more resilient.
Yep.
But it doesn't come out right out and say that.
No, it should be more direct. Yes, agreed.
If that's what you're doing, just say
it.
Look, we're going to bundle this up and we're going to make it easy for these smaller entities to become ransomware resilient, right? We're going to give you some ransomware protection. We're going to give you backup recovery, the ability to restore if you're under an attack, and put you in a better position. But you don't read any of that in here. We're hypothesizing that's what they're trying to do. But if that's what you're trying to do, just say it.
Right. Agreed. Well, awesome. That rounds out the stories for this week. We'll take a short break, come back, and talk about tactics for understanding security vendor products. Stay tuned.